Americanized. I think what I would suspect Brody was part of this, his lawyer, was to increase the public opinion in the officer's favor because there has been so much press against him. It is before the courts, but it's not as if he's describing what his position will be or what his evidence will be. It's really no different than what the press has already reported. The video is online, we can see that. We've heard all about the deceased background, the mental health issues. So I think this is fair game. I think this is a brilliant move on Mr. Brody's part and on the officer's part.
Now, Brody is Brody Thorning Zabaris is the legal
Yes.
firm representing the police, right? They represent the police association in any kind of criminal cases. So, but to me, when I read this as a journalist who covered the courts for a long time, I start to worry about swaying a jury. Like anybody that reads this article has got, the way it's written is almost like it's written in the third person, but through his wife. But I'm pretty sure he was sitting there nodding along with the interview. But it specifically says he's prohibited from talking about any case in front of the courts, including his own, but that rule doesn't apply to his wife. So is this just a way of getting around things? I mean, we see things on the internet all the time that we, as traditional media, would never have reported.
Well, I think first of all the rules are archaic. I think they were put into place when the internet didn't exist. I think you can find out almost anything now, and the internet has already put out a fair number of articles and information about this case. So in terms of swaying the jury, it's already out there, number one. Number two, I think there needs to be amendments so that when the press does report on one side, the accused is allowed to report on the other side. And I think there needs to be a balance. And I don't blame the officer for having this article being put out. I don't blame it at all. I mean, here's the irony. In some ways, as lawyers, we say a picture is worth 1,000 words, or a video is worth 1,000 words. But people spend too much time thinking that once the picture is there and once the video is there, it's a done deal. It's not a done deal. It's not what's in the picture or in the video. It's what's not seen in the video or picture. We don't have, for instance, the sound. And we will never be in that position, as all those officers were, that will be able to testify at some point, if they need to, what the ambiance was there and the tension or lack thereof. So, I don't blame the officer for saying, well, hold on a second, it's not just the video. There's a lot more to this, and we want you to know now that this is not a fait accompli. I mean, look at, there was so much bad press about this officer. Isn't he entitled to the presumption of innocence like anyone else?
My question is this. If we are going to change what is reportable, and you say perhaps it's archaic with the internet and with everything else, then what happens with jury selection? Will it be that every second person can say, you know what, I have a really strong opinion about this, so I'm not unbiased? How is that how do we see this developing in the big picture?
I mean, look, I'm not the best person to talk about in regards to juries because I don't think most people want to be on a jury. And I have noticed more often than not that people will find excuses. Not everybody. And I certainly wouldn't want to sit there all day without saying anything, especially since I talk way too much as it is. But, who wants to take time out of their day to spend months and months? So if a juror doesn't want to sit, they're not going to want to sit. And I do agree with you that they will have some strong feelings. I mean, there are types of cases like this one and like Luca Magnotta that we will talk about that will invoke strong, extremely strong opinions and biases from potential jurors. That's just the luck of the draw, the circumstances.
I know, but when people are selecting a jury, if you're defending a client or you're prosecuting someone, you have an interest that they not be biased, hugely biased against you, that they have a somewhat open mind. Now, there are people who don't want to serve on a jury for whatever reason, they can't be bothered. Fine, that's one thing. But you then now have to find, about a number of people who are not already going to vote against you, let's say.
Well, there are some safeguards, although I must say that the number of questions that you can ask a potential juror is minute in comparison to the United States. And I think the law is developing now to allow for an expansion of those questions. So, let's put it another way as well. When I first started practicing in 1990, there was a very strong opinion that the police are always right and that their word should be taken at face value. We have come a long way from there, and the pendulum has almost swung the opposite way. Neither is fair. And so I think depending on the culture, I think depending on where we are in society, I think that factors into our biases at any rate. So do I have enough faith in human nature that people are going to honestly say, when asked by a judge, if they can, excuse their biases or they can judge the case without any bias? I don't have enough faith that people are going to be honest. And, maybe that's my cynicism after practicing as long as I have. But I do share your concerns, and I do agree with you that in a perfect world, we would not know any of this information until the trial starts. It's just not possible anymore, not with the internet.
Well, with the Luke Magnotta trial, had it not started because they were in pretrial motions? Had it not started before all these documentaries came out? Christine and Sharon interviewed the makers of the documentary. Mm-hmm. But because the lawyer had tried to move, the defense lawyer had tried to move for a publication ban on the entire trial in a pretrial motion. Now, is that just wording? Because I would have thought the trial had started if you're in motions, but there is that word pre in front of there, pre-trial. So what's the cutoff for that?
I mean, I watched the documentary yesterday. Extremely fascinating. And I'd have so much more to say if we had time. But I know the lawyer. I've dealt with the lawyer for a number of years, Luc Leclerc, an interesting individual. He has always tried to push the envelope, and he has always tried to make new law or ask for unique orders that just aren't possible. It's not possible to put a publication ban on the whole trial, number one. Number two, I mean, for what purpose? The jury is in there listening to the evidence. So what the public thinks is irrelevant. I suspect Mr. Leclerc is under a very controlled set of orders by Luc Magnotta to bring whatever motions Mr. Magnotta thinks are appropriate. I can suspect, and I'm probably right, as I often am.
You sound like my husband there, Marcy. Careful.
I said that for...
Let me just tell you how it is. There's no discussion.
Is that...
I know for a fact would be my husband's line. Like, yeah, really? You do? Yeah. Okay.
But I digress. Luca Magnotta is running this show. There is no doubt in my mind that he's running this show. And so there is no way, in my view, that any publication ban on the entire proceedings could ever be affected. And so, no, the trial hasn't started. It starts September 8th. The pretrial motions, there's been 2 motions and 2 judgments already. I suspect in a week or so the results will come out. And it probably has to do with all this very damaging, not direct evidence involving the kittens, involving the fact that he was online almost 24/7 building his own sort of reputation.
So
fascinating.
In a sense, he's the one that's put his own trial in jeopardy, his fair trial in jeopardy.
Oh, he did it himself. I mean, it was he wanted his own persona. He wanted to become a larger-than-life individual, and unfortunately, I think he's going to revel in all the publicity once this trial starts. He's going to be a very fascinating trial. I suspect it'll be simply about identity, and whether or not he's guilty of first, second degree murder or manslaughter. I don't think there's going to be any issue, really, that he's the culprit. As I understand it, the deceased blood is, or it's anticipated, is all over his apartment. And the amount of taunting and the emails that went by, and the fact that he was telling people it's going to be humans instead of kittens this time, I think it'll be a small amount on identity, and then whether or not he had the intent. Yes, I also understand that he sent emails saying humans will be next. But I have no doubt in some ways it'll be a sideshow. It'll be gut-wrenching for the family. One other really interesting tip, and I know we're out of time soon. The psychiatrist had interviewed Bernardo, and Russell Williams passed on the opportunity to do so with Magnotta. Now, he's a Dr. Bradford. I also watched a documentary on him. Fascinating individual. And as a result of Russell Williams, he was interviewing him for hours and hours and hours, and the interviews had to be in the evening because it had to be discreet. So you would go about your normal business during the day, and he was driving home one day after this interview, and he just broke down, and he had had enough, and he suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder because of how excruciating some of the interview was. And he said, I'm too old now, which he isn't, he's young. I've had my day, and it's time to pass it on to another person. And I just want to say one other point, because lawyers will never be quiet, is that when we talked about publication bans, when I watched the documentary on the Fifth Estate, which again is something that I would recommend for people, it was excellent.
Marcy, did they have the ex-girlfriend who potentially could be a witness at the trial?
Agreed. And the ex-girlfriend, yes. And you know what? Very, very
was
fascinating.
In the documentary. I mean, seriously.
Very, very fascinating about that. But I think they had been estranged for a little part. But what's also interesting is the Montreal Reporter was reporting during the preliminary inquiry and said on air that the police officer took the stand and was talking about a video that was introduced into evidence. Now, we know what the video is, number one. Number two, that's clearly breaching a publication ban there. But, I mean, I guess,
Are there no rules?
I think, look, there are no, what the Supreme Court of Canada does and what the Criminal Code says to make our lives even more difficult is it isn't defined rules. It's for us to interpret. So I do agree with you that technically he did breach it, and I believe that technically means breaching it. But,
So for all those years, Kate and I followed rules that really were not that?
I suspect what probably happened was the legal counsel were acting very conservatively in terms of advising the press what they could and they couldn't do. I'm not saying wrongly. But again, with the Internet and the advent of the Internet, I think it's unrealistic for there to be any wide publication ban. And I think people didn't really understand what it meant by evidence. And evidence means if somebody is testifying, or there's an agreed statement of fact that's being entered into evidence, or an exhibit entered into evidence, that's what you can't report on. But walking in the courtroom and...
Okay, well, the next thing will be cameras in the courtroom. Right, Kate?
No, they might catch me napping. Never mind. Okay, we have to leave it there. Thank you, Marcy. It's always a pleasure.
Much.
We'll chat next week. There is much more still to come here on What She Said, so don't go away.